Good morning, everybody. Can you please take your seats? This poster is a bit... Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2017 Certification and DOA workshop. It's impressive to see such a big group. The interest is really high in this event. Before we go through the details of the agenda, I would like to invite Trevor to do a few welcome remarks and the introduction to this conference. Trevor.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cologne. Welcome to the DOA certification workshop. As Marcus said, it's really impressive to have so many people here. Normally, we like to hold these events at our building down the road, which we are very happy with, and always like to invite you there. But there are so many of you. We've had to hire a room at the Pullman, and not only that, we've extended to live streaming. Welcome if you're joining us on YouTube out there. We've adapted some of the ways we run this conference as well, and one of the things we've added this time is the use of Slido. That's a web-based tool that you can sign in on your phone, and you can register questions through there, and Marcus will explain a bit later exactly how to do it. And I think if you're on YouTube, I think you can sign in as well and ask questions. So in terms of the questions and the way we're going to run the session, let's try and keep to the agenda. Please ask questions through the Slido process, and also raise your hand and we can have questions through the mic. So we'll have a mixture of those things. Questions that we don't address, if you put a question on Slido, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. We'll try and pick the most popular questions, but the others that don't get answered, don't worry. We'll look at those and we'll address them afterwards, and we'll publish the answers to those questions as well. Yesterday, we already started, in fact, with side meetings, various sectors, and the feedback I get was there were some good debates there, and we'll hear during the workshop feedback from those groups. We've done this before, and it was very popular on other occasions. So as we do it, we'll learn each year and get the best out of that. It's a really good way for you to have a discussion amongst your colleagues and provide the important feedback to us. so that we can take account of that in the way we implement changes or identifying things that we need to change. You may have heard the term CPAC. This is going to be one of the changes, the way we do business. Marcus, what does it stand for? Okay, we'll work that out later. I like putting my managers on the spot. Perhaps we'll have a contest who can figure it out. But anyway, it's a web-based tool. It's going to be a way that we can exchange information on projects. My vision is that I'll walk in my office in the morning, press the red button if I feel in a bad mood, find out who in my team is behind on their projects, where are the sticking points, and call them to my office to explain. So hopefully that will support you to make sure everything's running smoothly and we keep our projects on time and address what we need to do is address contentious items early in the project and not waiting until the day after the day you wanted your certificate to find out. So really we want to have a very interactive workshop to share information. It's your opportunity, as I said, to already started yesterday. Please join in the discussion. Use every opportunity you can to network, to exchange views, to share with us your ideas. Use the coffee breaks and the questions and the discussion time to do that. Where are we at the moment with EASA? Well, we're moving to a new phase, really. We had been growing since EASA was created. A few years ago, we were capped with our size. The number of people we can have in EASA is limited, and so we have to do our business within that now. And it means that we need to focus on the way we do things, become more efficient as new tasks come, as the industry grows, as new businesses come. We have to do it within our existing resources. And here in Europe we have this wonderful environment where we have the DOA organizations, and we do really rely a lot on your competence to carry out activities where we can trust you to do that. And that's really what our LOI initiative is about, to make the best of that, so that we can use our resources most effectively and we don't burden you with over-regulation. So I look to you to give us feedback how to best implement that. We've been working on it to improve it. We have to, step by step, we're getting there, and a lot of the time will be taken updating you on where we are with LOI. The environment that we work in is now continuously changing, with new technology coming, and I'm sure that a lot of you are working on new technology. You're working on new business models, new ways of operating. We have to worry about security more and more. We have to take account of the impacts on our environments as to what we do and how we operate. And I think that our environment is becoming more and more important. We see climatic events, and I think that people are more focused on it. So this is one of the changes that will impact on us, and the technology that we're using gives us a great potential to not only improve safety but protect the environment. We have to adapt to those changes, and really we've been talking about how to do that for a while, including taking a more risk-based approach, hence the initiatives on LOI. We need to change the way we do business, and I mentioned CPAC as an example of that. So we need to manage these changes, and that includes coordinating what we change with you, how we implement the changes to respond together. So if you see changes you need to make, we need to be aware of that so that we can coordinate. And this workshop is really central to that coordination and working together towards that. You may be aware, I'm sure you're aware already, of the basic regulation changes that are being proposed. This will change the framework in the EASA system. It will enable transfer of tasks. It will add tasks to us, and so we need to look at that, and that will have an impact on the way we do business as well. The fees and charges regulation is due for review and update soon, so we have to take account of all these changes as well in the fees and charges regulation, the way it's structured, and we're looking at innovative ways of doing that. I really am very pleased with the turnout today, the enthusiasm already before we started. You can see the buzz in the room. Please make the most of it. Join in on YouTube, use Slido, and let's get the most out of it. Enjoy the workshop, and please go back to your business with something you brought from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor, for these introduction remarks. A few general updates. Where's the slide? A few updates on the proceedings of the next 2 days and what actually started already yesterday in the side meetings. It's the third time that we have this combined certification and DOE workshop, and the popularity, as you can see, is really high, and it's about working together, as Trevor mentioned it already, and that's quite important for us. And the objectives is to discuss topics of common interest to all, and you will see that throughout with level of involvement and others, but we also had the chance to discuss topics of a more specific nature, like flight test topics that not affect everybody, but which have quite an importance in the day-to-day work. And I think the interaction that Trevor mentioned, you asking questions, challenging us, we will try our best to respond to your demands. And that leads me actually to the next slide. It gives also the opportunity to small organizations to provide their problems to us, to raise topics and discuss also among other companies. And that was quite interesting yesterday in the side meetings we had. People facing the same problems, but without talking to each other, they don't know that others found a solution already or how to address certain things. And the side meetings yesterday were quite helpful to some of them, as I found from the discussions and the feedback afterwards. These side meetings showed that this is the right approach to prepare, because the side meetings were focusing on topics raised by you, the industry, the DOAs, and we from EASA, my colleagues, were just facilitating and helping in organizing the meetings and the discussions. And you can see we changed a little bit the groups. We still have the group for airline DOAs. Then we had one for general aviation. Rotorcraft is new, but we thought this community has some specific issues to tackle, and I think the feedback I got was that it was quite positive on this setup. Then we had, like in the past, SEC holders and small DOAs. We had one group on ETSO, which is also new, the ADOAs dealing with ETSO approvals. And the last one was the DOAs from outside the EU, because we have quite a number of organizations which are approved as an EASA DOA, which are not located within the EU. And as I said, we had quite some interesting discussions, and the feedback of these discussions will be provided tomorrow in the dedicated sessions for each of these side groups. The material of the workshop will be available online, I think, by the end of the week, early next week at the latest, so all the presentations. We will also publish the FAQs like last year. And we depend heavily on you for this workshop to make it successful. So beside, like we did in the last years, to hand around microphones and ask people to ask questions, we introduced the new tool Slido, where you can ask questions more or less online using your mobile device. You have to log into this address, slide.do, and the code for this event is, I can't read it from here, but at CTDOA 2017. So, and please, when you enter for the first time, enter your name and email address if possible. We got already one question, which was anonymous. Sorry, you should be brave enough, more or less, to say when you ask a question who you are and what your email address is. We will try to answer all questions at latest offline. We will see questions, and you can vote for questions when you support other questions and you think, yeah, that's something I'm interested in. We will try to answer some of them online at the spot during the presentations or directly after the presentations. But we will for sure collect everything, and then we'll provide after the meeting a dedicated questions and answers document. And you can see also in the tool when you registered the other questions and how popular they are, more or less. After the workshop, we will send you an email, and don't put it to your spam folder, please, to get your feedback on this event. Because it's really important for us to see what went well, how to improve, and how we can do things better in the future. So please take a few minutes when you receive this email and provide the feedback to us. As we have such a big group, and as for most of you, it is also quite important to meet each other. We have plenty of opportunities during the coffee break, the lunch break, etc. And we have a reception this evening. So I think there's enough time for you to discuss with your colleagues things beside the presentation. So for today, you see quite a number of breaks. Tomorrow is a bit shorter, but we start at 8:30 tomorrow. And we will close around 4:30, and Patrick Key will join us tomorrow for the closing session. You all should have the agenda in front of you. As you can see, we have a pretty packed agenda. We try to group things in the most sensible manner. So today we will start with the things that interest most of you, like level of involvement, international cooperation, and a few specific topics like the GA roadmap and Part 21 proportionality. But I think it's interesting for everybody, these topics that we put on the agenda. Most of you who joined here the last years were coming also because of the Christmas markets. Unfortunately, most of them are still closed. I think they will open at the weekend. I was told one is opening already tomorrow, so those of you who stay longer might have a chance. But otherwise, Cologne is a nice city to stroll around. So, and with that, I would like to hand over to Alain Leroy to introduce the first topic of the day, level of involvement. And by the way, we have, in case you of an emergency, you have at the back doors and here the emergency access with the green signs to evacuate the building just in case. Thanks. And then Alain.
Thank you, Markus. Well, good morning, everyone. Last year, we spent a bit, let's say, an hour and a half on LOI. And LOI, for us, is really a topic. It is a top priority. LOI, what does it mean as an acronym? Level of involvement. So it does not help much. You are all used to what we call LOI in our normal business, how we work with DOAs and so forth. However, LOI for all of us, for the agency, but for you as well as industry partners, LOI is a change, really. We have to change our mindset. We are moving toward partnership. What does it mean? A DOA is delivering something, and we are working with the DOA on how to make this output acceptable into our regulatory system. So last year we were a bit fast. I was a bit fast, in fact, because I was running the show. This year I've decided to keep quiet because I have a lot of colleagues who worked a lot all over the year. We have also a lot of industry colleagues that I would like to thank. In particular, our steering group members, Gilles Garous, for instance, from Dassault. Thanks a lot, Gilles. We do not always agree, I have to say, but in the end, I think we are on the right way. We are working on something to be more efficient globally, how to make use of the DOA performance, how to make use of our resources the best possible way. Everything else is literature, as we say. So in a nutshell, we want to move us and you to the next step, how to be partners, how to leave the old-fashioned prescriptive way where the authority knows what to do, and we have to tell industry that's how you have to do, and if you don't do so, we won't be friends forever. So we have a problem. Now this is over. We have to really have a change management to introduce a lot of new approaches to our work, but in fact it's not new. DOA is in place since when, Michael? Since 1991. So I think now it should be mature. Obviously it will be mature next year. The year after, we move to the next phase. And this next phase, I think, Michael, as the leader of the activity in the agency, together with my colleague Ralph Bader, Chief PCM, will guide you through. It's a long journey, I have to say. It's a full half day this morning dedicated to LOI. So please, again, use Slido, because we need your feedback. It is very important. Whatever you have as a question, as a comment, as a concern, make it known. But again, I insist, back to what Trevor mentioned before, let us know who you are. And the anonymous question, we cannot deal with anonymous questions because at the end of the day, it is not productive. We need to establish a contact, we need to establish a communication with you, and that's really our credo. We are working with industry, we are working with stakeholders. LOI is our common tool. And by the way, CEPIAC, if you look at page 2 of the agenda, you will see what CEPIAC means. It's a shared electronic platform for initial airworthiness certification. Thank you, Marcus. So, you will know all about CEPIAC tomorrow. And why do I mention CEPIAC? Because CEPIAC is really one fundamental tool into our LOI environment. CEPIAC is also, we expect from CEPIAC significant efficiency gain, better planning, better coordination, better communication in order to adjust our LOI in real time together with you. And for us management to know where we are, very important. So in a nutshell, this morning, introduction in detail on where do we stand with LOI. Do not hesitate to mention your questions. We will do our best to answer. And later today, you will see how we want to implement CEPIAC in this new environment. Thank you very much. And now, Michael, Ralph, up to you.
So I'm happy that we have an easy acronym for level of involvement. Good morning, everybody. My name is Micah Garrett. I'm managing the Regulations and Certification Policy section in the agency, which is basically the team that prepares the rules, develops the rules in relation to initial airworthiness. And my team has developed that proposal for level of involvement with a big support from many, many colleagues in the agency, and also Ralph Bader, Chief PCM on EU products, plays a big role in this exercise. And the two of us, we are intending to guide you through this morning. We try to make it as interesting as possible. We are looking forward to your questions. And we would like to show you what has happened since we met last year in this forum. What have we done in the previous 12 months to further develop the concept of level of involvement. We will be joined on stage by a couple of colleagues who will take over parts of that presentation. For example, Leonardo Carpacci, who is the responsible rulemaking officer in my team. We will be joined also by Werner Hörmann, who is the senior expert on aircraft engine and emissions, and also by Anne Seneschal, who is the PCM on parts and appliances. They will give you, especially when we talk about the lessons learned and the applicability of these specific elements of LOI, more detailed information on their domains. So, the journey that we have in mind for this morning. If you can please put the next slide. Sorry. I have it. Sorry. Yes. So you see the names of the colleagues who are going to join us on stage. And that's actually the journey that we have in mind for this morning. I'm going to briefly introduce you the intent of level of involvement, why do we want to change it, and what we are going to change. Really a rough overview of that. After that, we will explain you the main milestones in the past and what has happened in the previous weeks. So where are we with the different elements of level of involvement? And then, as Ella mentioned, during last year we already spent an hour and a half where we explained you the ideas at that point in time that we had with level of involvement. We will use today a couple of minutes, maybe 15-20 minutes, to remind on those principles and also show you where we have put more guidance, more detail into these principles. Following that, we will explain you in detail what has happened in the past 12 months. We wanted to show you how we intend to apply level of involvement for approved organizations. And specifically here, we have spent a lot of time in the previous 12 months and even longer than that in testing already the draft rule and the draft guidance that we have developed in so-called advanced application projects. A number of you have volunteered to support us there and to help us in gaining some lessons learned in the way of developing the guidance material. That was really helpful for us to develop the guidance material while already testing it on some projects. You see here a couple of points that we want to mention, some lessons learned that we have, especially on proportionality aspects in the guidance material, on the complexity of the guidance material and the administrative burden that is sometimes perceived to be created. We also have an overview of other lessons learned. We want to show you some outcomes of these advanced application projects, also some statistics in relation to the risk assessment. And then one particular element, as we are very often talking about the safety side, one particular element, how is LOI being applied on environmental issues. Following that, where I put here your experience so far, we have asked one company from the GA side to present you their experience, their lessons learned, and their recommendations to us on level of involvement. Tecnam, who is one company supporting us in that advanced application phase, will tell you their experience with applying it. And we also would like to ask the other companies who participate in that advanced application phase to also give us your feedback here and to explain to the other people your experience with the advanced application of level of involvement. This is the big block for approved organizations. Following that, we want to look into how we are applying level of involvement for organizations which are not approved, who use an alternative procedure to demonstrate their capability, or only get the approval of the certification program to demonstrate their capability. And then at the end, how is level of involvement applied in ETS-OA projects? And at the very end, I'm going to show you the milestones in the future. When do we expect level of involvement to come into place? And what can you still expect in these months coming up on the development of the guidance material and the implementation of level of involvement? So a lot of information for the next 2.5 hours. As I said, we try to make it as interesting as possible. and please don't hesitate to ask questions. We will interrupt our presentation on a couple of occasions after certain chapters so that we can take your questions on board and immediately react to them. So you don't have to wait until the end of the session.
Michael, if I may just, we got some questions about the Slido registration. It is CT-DOA 2017. In the folders that you have, there is the word workshop. Forget about the word workshop. It's just CT-DOA 2017. And again, please put your details like name and email in that we can follow that up properly. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry for that. Thanks, Marcus. So let's start with the purpose of level of involvement. So, yes. So the first part is what do we want to change and why? So if you look into part 21, especially 21A21, 21A239, you see that it's an obligation on the applicant to demonstrate compliance against the certification basis, and also if you're an approved organization to have that independent checking, that verification function. This is an obligation on the applicant. The agency has to be, and that's my wording, you don't find that word in part 21, but the agency has to be convinced that the applicant has properly demonstrated compliance and verified compliance in order then to issue the certificate or approval. This is sometimes called a second verification. You also don't find that term in part 21 today, but in the revised version in the future you will find that agency activity called also verification. If you then have a look into part 21 today and you want to know to what extent does the agency involve itself in that verification activity, what are the criteria that the agency uses in order to determine its involvement, you will not find anything. So there's nothing in part 21 today that gives rights or obligations to the agency. Sorry. Yeah. That gives rights and obligation to the agency on how to determine its involvement. So that's the issue today. That's what we want to change. We want to put in part 21 the rights and obligations for the agency and mirroring that for the applicant. Where does the agency is getting involved in the compliance verification? And we basically have three purposes that we want to achieve, three objectives that we want to achieve when we introduce in part 21 this level of involvement. This clearly has to be risk-based. We cannot review everything. We should not review things that we have already seen many, many times. Trevor and Alain already mentioned we will have a lot of projects in the future. What is important is that we focus the resources to those part of the projects which poses the highest risks. So the agency should determine its involvement on that risk-based approach. That's one of the main objectives for the introduction of level of involvement. The second big objective is that, as I mentioned, today in part 21 you don't find any criteria, any process on how the agency determines its involvement. So what we want to introduce is objective criteria and a transparent process on how the agency involves itself, which gives a certain predictability to you as the applicant. You have an idea when to expect our colleagues to be involved in your compliance demonstration or to verify your compliance demonstration activities on when they may want to follow a test, for example. So you have a certain level of predictability. It also gives us controlled processes on your side and on our side on the determination of our involvement. And last but not least, it also ensures an equal treatment of all applicants. So you can be sure that we treat you the same as we treat your competitors when we determine our involvement. And then the third big objective that we want to achieve is introduction of the safety management principle. Level of involvement is already a first step. It's not the last one, but it's the first step to implement ICAO Annex 19 into Part 21. We are working on the next step after LOI to do that. We have a specific rulemaking task ongoing on implementing SMS into Part 21, but LOI, please consider this as already being the first step of doing so. So, what are the main milestones that we have achieved already and that are ongoing at the moment? We do have a rulemaking task ongoing. Some of you may remember that number. It's rulemaking task 262, level of involvement, which we started in August 2013 with the terms of reference and the concept paper. In summer 2015, we issued a first proposal, first ideas on how to introduce level of involvement in Part 21 in this Notice of Proposed Amendment NPA 2015-03. The big milestone that we had achieved last year and which we were discussing with you, which we were presenting to you during that workshop last year, was the opinion that we had issued in May 2016, Opinion 7/2016, our proposal to the European Commission on what to change in Part 21. This proposal is currently discussed within the European Commission. They are preparing the legislative procedure, and I'm going to tell you at the end where we are and when we can expect that that legislative procedure ends, which then also means that we can think about the applicability of the rules. Today, level of involvement is not yet applicable. We are still at the proposal phase. Just want to remind you that within this opinion, we are not only talking about level of involvement. So that was definitely the biggest issue that we wanted to address in this opinion. You can also see that reflected in the title. But we also address other issues. We change, or we basically adapt our different rules in relation to the establishment of the certification basis, the basic regulation, Part 21, and a management board decision on product safety, where we align them, they are not aligned today, into one concrete provision on the determination of the certification basis. We also propose to introduce in Part 21 new privileges for approved organizations, for major changes, major repairs, and STCs. And we correct some inconsistencies in relation to the structure of Part 21 today, and some other issues. Today, this morning, we would like to focus on level of involvement. This afternoon, when I'm giving you an introduction and presentation about what has changed and what is going to change in Part 21, an update on the rulemaking activities, I will present you the other elements that are within this opinion. Since last year, since we met here last year, we have extensively worked on the implementation of this proposed rule change. We have developed guidance material, also with the support of some of you, with support of a lot of my colleagues within the agency. And the first step that we have done in order to develop guidance material, in order to implement that upcoming rule change, is we have specifically looked at the element of level of involvement. We have ignored the other proposal that you have seen on the previous slide, and developed guidance material for level of involvement. And the vehicle that we have used is a bit, it's not a typical one that you would expect for us to develop guidance material. You would expect us to develop AMC, acceptable means of compliance, and GM guidance material. We have decided to advance. We are in the process of developing those AMC and guidance material, but we have decided to advance the guidance material for level of involvement by using this vehicle of a certification memorandum. We have published the first idea, a first proposal for such guidance material in January on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I've put the link on the slide so that you can easily access it. We put it there for public consultation, so you had the chance to comment on that, to provide us with your ideas. We have reviewed these comments that we have received, and in July this year we have developed, based on the comments that we received, a second version, a draft 2 of the certification memorandum. In parallel, a little bit later, but now in parallel, we have started to work on the AMC and guidance material. So that's the guidance that you normally expect from us. And this AMC and guidance material is the full package. It contains the LOI specific guidance, it contains the guidance on the new privilege, and the guidance on the structural changes we've put to Part 21. So all that guidance related to all the elements that we proposed in this opinion to the European Commission, you can find in this AMC guidance material. It's what we call a phase 2 to that rulemaking activity on level of involvement. And the main elements that we had proposed and discussed beginning of the year in that certification memorandum on LOI have been transposed also in that NPA for the AMC and guidance material. We are at the moment at the phase where we are finalizing the notice of proposed amendment. So you can expect in the coming days, I would say in the next 2 weeks, the NPA getting public. We put it on the website for you to review it and to comment on it. You can see here on the slide already the title page. We just have to fill in the number and the date, but the document is more or less ready. It's in the final step of processing within the agency, and in a couple of days you can expect it on the website. And that will then contain all the AMC guidance material in relation to that opinion 7/2016. This will be further developed. We will need to prepare a second notice of proposed amendment in the course of next year. I put here quarter 2, quarter 3 next year, because at this stage we cannot yet give the guidance material to all the provisions that we have proposed in Part 21, because we already know that the Commission has changed some of our proposals. So the text that we have proposed slightly changed. So you will not understand the guidance material that we are preparing, because you are not yet knowing what these changes in the proposed rule in Part 21 are. So for that, we wait until the discussions within the commissions are finalized, and then we are going to launch a second NPA with these remaining AMC and guidance material. At the moment I expect, it's not a lot, I expected maybe 5 or 6 AMCs that we will consult in the course of next year. And then after the Commission has adopted the Part 21 amendment, then we will issue our decision and bring into force that AMC and guidance material. And that is a bit difficult to predict when that happens, because the process is within the Commission. On my last slide, or second last slide, I'm going to show you what we expect on when the rule enters into force and then eventually becomes applicable. So with that, I will leave you with my colleague Ralph.
Whoa. Okay. Thanks, Micah. So, I'm Ralph Bahner, the Chief PCM for Initial Airworthiness in EASA, and I will further proceed with the presentation about a reminder of the main principles of LOI. Reminder because last year on the DOA workshop this was already explained in a session, but I think after 1 year it's worth to remind on one or the other topic. So if we talk about level of involvement, what does it mean? It means actually the compliance demonstration activities and data that EASA retains for verification during the certification process. So this word retained will be repeated many times, because retained means really we look into it and we have the obligation to give a feedback to the applicant. If we get other demonstration just for information, you shouldn't expect any feedback, since you even don't know if we have reviewed it or not. And additionally, the depth of this verification. So it really depends on the compliance demonstration. If someone puts everything in one document, for sure not everything will be reviewed. It's then only a part, so the depth of this verification. If the information is very small, the review might be complete for this. So how do we do this to determine the level of involvement? It shall be based on the risk. It's a risk-based approach, part of the safety management system. And So what is risk? If we look into the dictionary, we see the meaning risk is the probability of occurrence of an unwanted event multiplied by the consequence of the event. So this is already quite similar to what we have here developed in the certification memorandum that you can find on the EASA webpage. From the principle start, if we have an application and product certification, it's always that's on the design organization, on the approved design organization to demonstrate compliance and as well to verify compliance according to 21A239. So what we are doing is based on the risk, we make a second verification, so a sample check. And to make this risk-based, we have got the definition. The risk is the likelihood of a non-compliance with a part of the certification basis, which is not identified through the agency involvement, in combination with its potential impact on product safety or environmental protection, which is quite the same as the dictionary explanation. So in the new part 21, we have two paragraphs. The A paragraph, which clearly is for the applicant, how to do it, and the B100 paragraph, which is for the agency or for the NAAs, how we deal with that. So per 21A15, it will be the obligation for the applicant to propose the involvement from EASA side. We come later on in further detail how to do it. And it's the responsibility of the agency to determine. So the applicant proposed something, and based on this proposal, we determine what our actual involvement should be. And on the right-hand side, you can see for the likelihood that for a specific CDI, we come later to this term, it's a compliance demonstration item, the applicant does not comply with the certification basis. So how likely is this? And its impact on the safety or on the environment. So that's the criticality. And for the likelihood, you'd have to take into account how novel is this compliance demonstration item, how complex is this, how critical is it, and what is actually the performance of the design organization in this technical domain. What's meant here is not necessarily the organizational performance, but really the performance in a certain frame of oxygen systems or whatever you like. What is your field of competence? Coming to the term CDI, compliance demonstration item. So part 21 will require that risk assessments is to be made, in most of the cases at least, per compliance demonstration item. And this is a new element. And actually what a CDI is, we find here at the bottom. It's a meaningful group of compliance demonstration activities and data taken from the certification program, which can be considered in isolation for the purpose of performing the risk assessment. And this is actually the only reason of a CDI. Otherwise, you would have to make a risk assessment on a project level or per activity or data, which is not practical. And therefore, this CDI animal is there to combine compliance demonstrations to one package and make a risk assessment on this. And the risk assessment is the only reason why we need the CDI. And now I answered already this question. Why was it necessary to create this new element? It's a tool to facilitate the risk assessment at a meaningful level. What meaningful level is actually the decision of the design organization or of the applicant. In the advanced application, we have not found any example which didn't work. So if you would take a complete new aircraft and say this is one CDI, we would probably interfere that this is not meaningful. But we have not seen any example which we didn't agree to. So we come later to some examples. But it's the tool of the applicant to say, well, this is what I group together and I make a risk assessment for that. Otherwise, using existing elements, the risk assessment needed to be made at the level of each compliance demonstration activity or data, so mostly documents, or at the level of the certification projects. And since this is impractical, we have the CDI. So here we have a kind of flowchart. You see here in the middle what has to be done, at the top what the applicant should do, and at the bottom what the EASA should do. So at the first step we see In black, by the way, is the unchanged part, and in green, what is coming on top with the CDI and the risk-based approach. So you see that the application, the certification basis, the certification program itself, that's nothing new. But what is coming new with 21A15 in the next Part 21 issue is this compliance demonstration item that has to be proposed by the applicant and the corresponding level of involvement from the agency based on this risk assessment. So the applicant makes such a proposal, and at the next step, EASA accept or comment and determine and notify about this involvement. So we have now actually the obligation to inform the applicant as soon as possible what is the EASA involvement, and I think this improves a lot in many cases the planning for the projects you have. What is new as well in the new Part 21 is the clear identification that the applicant has to inform EASA about any difficulty during the compliance demonstrations or during the certification process. And based on this new information, we may adapt our involvement or may not. If a test is going wrong completely and we were not witnessing it, maybe it's a good reason, whatever happened, that we should be involved, but maybe not. It's not necessary, but it's necessary to inform us that we can adapt our involvement if necessary. So for all the rest, it's the same as before. You still have to demonstrate and verify compliance, and we make a second verification based on sampling, based on the risk. The LOI is proposed as part of the certification program. So when we determine our involvement, this is after the formalization. This is a very important point as well. We have seen as well during the advanced applications already that this is sometimes mixed and confused. Before we can determine our involvement, we have to familiarize with what the applicant is applying for. So otherwise it's very difficult to know what we're talking about. So that's why the technical formalization is coming before the LOI process and the applicability of the certification memorandum starts. So when we have familiarized, then we look to the proposal and determine our LOI. And this is based on the certification program, which has to be accepted, and sufficiently detailed means and methods of compliance have to be included in the cert program, and before actually the applicant starts the compliance demonstration. I know that this happens often parallel. First, I think we have to be a bit quicker to accept the cert program. Secondly, it's as well on the risk of the applicant. If you start without knowing what our involvement should be, there is a risk to repeat something.
And should we maybe have a first set of questions?
I think that's the right time to have a short break for the questions. So maybe we can quickly glance through what we have received. Marcus, you want to introduce them maybe? And we'll see.
The most popular question will be answered in the session this afternoon, so I would spare that. But we got one, for example, from Gilles. How will we measure that LOI delivers a better focus on safety-related issues and a streamlined certification process with less bureaucracy? Thanks for the challenging question.
We can answer this afternoon if we skip all the other presentations.
Maybe a few words not to escape from the question, Gilles, and we will continue in various meetings. Again, back to what we said as an introduction, it is our common challenge. Clearly, we want to introduce efficiency gains. We have no other choice. We must introduce significant efficiency gain on both sides. Not only on the EASA, but also on the DOA side. We have to work together in a different way. That's what I said. The prescriptive, the authority versus industry, this should be over. Then, once we have gone through this first step, which is on the way, I think it's getting better and better, we can talk about real reduced bureaucracy and so forth. It's a change management, change of mindset. It will take a while. Clearly, our objective is to focus on really important, visible, highly sensitive issues, and not to get involved into the others when we can rely on the DOA. This is our mission statement for this overall Part 21 activity. You know it very well. It's the mission, the vision. Now we have to make it, we have to translate it into concrete actions. And the pilot project, as Michael was referring to, will give you a first feedback on how it works. And we are very humble here, I would say. We will learn a lot from the pilot project, and we will introduce the necessary simplification, streamlining, and so forth. But under a condition, we need the full DOA support in doing so. We need really to work as partners in this domain. Thanks.
One question.
Maybe to add. So I think we cannot say no, there is no more bureaucracy. So yes, there is one step more as we have just seen. So something has to be proposed based on a risk, and we have to determine. This is an additional step. However, we try to reduce this as much as possible and take it as simple as possible. And then we come to this in one of our slides. That it will better focus on safety. I think this is implicit. If you see that when we really check what is really novel, what is complex, what is really critical, and what is the performance, necessarily we come to the highest risk and involve the most important items. So I think for sure this will be better.
Okay, no wonder the next popular question is about how is the impact of LOI on the EASA fees and charges? Yeah.
How do you turn it on?
That's on.
Okay, so I'll just say a couple of words on that. You know, it's about using our resources where they're most valuable. So rather than going through a checklist of repeated things we do every time that we're fully confident, we use our time to look at the more new technology, novel areas of low performance, and so on. So I think that we don't envisage our workload overall will change much. It may do, and in some areas it may change more than others. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact on fees and charges because we have a flat fee typically for our activities. But I did mention that we're reviewing the fees and charges regulation, so clearly we need to include that in the discussion, the new way of doing business. And out of that should be the amount of time we spend on an activity, the fees for that activity should reflect the time we spend. But as I say, I think overall we're not envisaging to spend much different time overall. There are some areas which are not LOI but related to LOI, where we introduce the concept of if it is a change that is similar to the change the company has done before, then it can be done on the basis of their privileges. Therefore, there will be an automatic reduction in fees because they won't need to make an application for a specific approval. So there will be some gains like that as well. So I think really that's all I could say on that question, but it's a good question. We'll take that on board. Thanks.
Okay, I will take two more questions. One is related to the work either by EASA or the NAA. How does EASA ensure equal treatment of applicants in case an application is delegated to an NAA? LOI agreed with NAA is known to differ from EASA's standpoint. Interesting question. Well, we have various elements, and we heard that from you at several occasions. One, for example, is, at least at the DOA level, but also from my product certification colleagues, we have regular meetings with our NAA colleagues to standardize and to have the same understanding on the approach to, for example, new things like OSD, that we all have the same understanding what to check, how to do these things. What we started this year to introduce is common teams that we have. I'm a team leader, and you will see that tomorrow in my presentation, from the NAA and a team member from EASA, or the other way around, also to standardize the approach and to get some more feedback. And my colleagues are implementing a new quality monitoring process with NAAs. We had in the past an accreditation process which more or less stopped, and they're setting up now a new system. So we know there are some issues, and we are trying to address them by various means, and we have to see whether there is still then the same issues or whether we see some improvement. But it's a valid question.
And Markus, if I may complement to that, we also started to train our colleagues internally beginning of this year. All PCMs and experts and DOA team leaders are being trained on the new concept of level of involvement, and since summer we also extend that training to the NAA colleagues who work on behalf of the EASA in these projects. So that's another tool where we try to ensure that we all have the same approach.
And last but not least, also CPIAC will have to be used by NAAs. So for us, for our EASA headquarters, it will be much easier to track, to monitor what is going on. Today, we have to agree it is difficult to have a real-time oversight of all projects which are undergone within the NAAs. Tomorrow, with CPIAC, we will have a central location where we, EASA, DOA and product certification colleagues will have the possibility to check in real time what is going on, not only in terms of planning, but also in terms of involvement, because everything will be visible to us. So you may expect some significant standardization improvement with this new tool. And the tool will be implemented, is already started to be implemented, what we call phase 1, and will be implemented later next year in phase 2 and follow-up. So let's be optimistic, this will be reported much better in the coming years.
And maybe as an additional point, this new risk-based approach will for sure help to standardize. So everybody works then according to this risk-based approach, and this will lead for sure to a higher standardization between SNAs and the agency.
Okay, thanks. We will track follow questions, but I think some of them that we have already on the list will be answered throughout the presentation, so we are not going to address them right now, like the one for minor changes, minor repairs, companies only. We will also use the microphones in between if you have questions that you don't want to use the Slido systems, but I think we should continue now with the presentation.
Yes. Okay, so how can I get it? Okay, so far what we have seen is what is in Part 21, what will change in Part 21. The only thing that you will find in Part 21 are these two provisions mentioned by Ralph, 21A15 and 21B100, where we have proposed to include the risk-based approach and these 4 criteria: novelty, complexity, organization performance, and criticality. That's where Part 21 stops, and the challenge now is to implement that, to fill this with life. And that's what we've tried to do in these guidance materials that we are developing at the moment. So the question that we have to answer is, in the end, the practice today, you know that we have to decide, if I use a term that we have with many applicants, if a certain compliance demonstration data or activity is retained, yes or no. So are we being involved or not? That's the question that we have to answer. And how are we doing that? We proposed in our guidance material to identify risk classes. These risk classes, we have created 4 risk classes from 1 to 4. Risk class 1 means no further involvement of the agency, so after the acceptance of the certification program. Well, these are the cases where the risk assessment has led to a minimum risk. That means no further involvement of the agency. If it comes up to risk class 2, there's a limited involvement of the agency. If it's class 3, it's more involvement, and if it's risk class 4, it's most involvement. So a very easy approach. We decided to split it into 4 risk classes. Then the question is, how do we get to these risk classes? So we have to make an assessment of, and that goes back to what Ralph presented to you, what is the risk we are looking at. we have to look at the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance with a certification basis and the severity of that for safety and environment. So that is the risk assessment that you'll find in 21B100. And for that, we're going to use risk matrices. We're going to show you in detail how they look like. That's a picture that you will recognize again in a couple of minutes. So we have to make this risk assessment using these two criteria from part 21. And this risk assessment, in the end, how has it been done? We apply these four criteria: novelty, complexity, organization performance, and criticality, and put them in a certain combination. And that is actually what we are trying to do in this guidance material that we are preparing. So looking at it from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, so the starting point is that we need to put the four criteria together. We propose in the guidance material a three-step approach for determining level of involvement by using these four criteria that are given in part 21. The first step is to identify the likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance with a certification basis. And in the guidance material, we have decided, we are proposing to use three of these four criteria, namely the novelty and the complexity and the performance of the organization. Once we know that likelihood, in step 2, we will make the risk assessment by putting the criticality into the picture, assessing the criticality, so the impact on product safety or environment, and bring that in relation to the likelihood identified in step 1. Then we have the risk classes, but that doesn't say anything. From the risk classes, the most important step actually is then the third step. From the risk classes, we have to come to that activity that we are doing already today, retained, non-retained. We have to determine which compliance demonstration activity, which compliance demonstration data is the agency, does the agency verify. And that's then the last step, where then you will have the concrete, specific output. Agency will review this document, will look into these data, will follow that test. That's the third step. And what we want to explain to you now is how are we performing these three steps.
I need the presentation. Here we are. So the first criteria according to 21B100 is the novelty. So first to understand, for simplification, you could talk about a lot about what is novel, what's not novel, but for us it's binary for the reason of simplification. It's just, yes, novel or not novel. Just to take an example which makes it more obvious, if you have maybe a new structural material, a new aluminium alloy, you could say, yeah, that's new, okay. If you have a different metal, a magnesium alloy, that's even newer from a certain perspective. And if you create a new composite material, which has never seen before, it's even more new. So, but we don't take these different weighing factors into account, because otherwise it would really become too complex. So for this simplification reason, we have it just binary. And novel, there are different aspects. It can be the new technology, new operation, or a new installation, a new requirement, or a new means of compliance. If you've always done it by tests, today you do it by an assessment, by an analysis, this would be seen as new as well. It might be novel for the applicant or for the agency, even if for the agency it will be a very, very rare case. So it doesn't mean that it's new for a certain expert or PCM. This is not valid. It must be really new for the whole agency. So this might be very rare. But novel for the applicant, even if it's a well-known technology, but it's not well known by a certain applicant, this would be new for this applicant, not for the others. And we have to also consider the time between two applications. So if we have a time period of, let's take an example, 10 years, we would say, yeah, then it's new again. If you have 10 years not worked on such an item, we would consider this as novel again. Next criteria, complexity. same again. Here it's only binary. It can be more or less complex, but here we say just yes, no. It's not complex or it is complex. Complex can it be, again, for the design, for the technology or associated manufacturing processes, for the compliance demonstration, including test setup or analysis, interpretation of results of compliance demonstration, or interface with other technical disciplines or CDIs, or the requirements. To give an idea here as well, if the compliance demonstration might be very subjective. So if something is required to be simple and obvious, this means something completely different for any of us. Therefore, you need many people to test this, and there we come into subjectivity, where we would say, yeah, okay, now this is complex. The third criteria, performance of the organization. There we have 3 different ratings. Low is equal to unknown for us, medium or high. This is coming from the dashboard, which should have been received by each design organization approval holder from us. Marcus, did each DOA get this dashboard already, or is it?
The annual meeting.
So during the annual meetings, you have got or you will get it, but I was told that the majority of the design organization have received this already. So different approaches are applied depending on whether the organization has demonstrated its capability, and there are different ways to do it. You have a design organization approval, or alternative procedures for design organization approval, or at the lower end you just provide a certification program, or we are in the EASA area, so there you can have a DOA if you're an APU for APUs, otherwise not. And to make it maybe a little bit more simple, if you have a design organization, you're a candidate for these 3 categories. If you don't have a design organization, there is not our oversight function in place for such a dashboard, and therefore it's for us unknown. So that's why it's simplified even for the non-design organization approval holders. The 4th criteria is the severity or criticality. Here again, it's binary, it's critical or non-critical. And some criteria are derived from the guidance material of 21A91, so the minor-major classification. So if, for example, the failure effect is classified as hazardous or catastrophic, it's necessarily then critical. It's necessarily major. This does not mean that all the CDIs are critical. So here we really have to go down, make the risk assessment on the level of a compliance demonstration item of this grouping. And therefore, for a major change, it's nearly sure that at least one CDI is critical, but nevertheless, for sure, not all of them. And this depends as well how you configure your compliance demonstration items and make a risk assessment then. The appreciable effect on the human-machine interface is a critical item. Airworthiness limitations or operating limitations that are established or potentially affected. And the CDI, if the CDI is affected by an AD or occurrences potentially subject to an AD or by a safety information bulletin. So these are typical criteria where I would say, yes, the CDI is critical. Please always concentrate on it's on the CDI level, not on the project level. So where you cannot determine at the beginning of a project, so especially if you have huge projects at the beginning with the application and the cert program, not everything is known already. If we don't know it exactly, then go to the conservative side, and for sure we will adapt it later anyway with the additional new information. Defining the risk class. So to define the risk class, these 4 criteria, as I just explained, will be combined in tables that you see here, but we go into further detail. You cannot read it at the moment, but we will see them again. And depending on the way how the applicant demonstrates their capabilities of the organization, the combination will vary. So we will see on the next slides. Yep, here we are. On the left-hand side, you see some examples of typical means of compliance. So the analyzers, test, audits, descriptions, qualifications, inspections, and so on. These are the means of compliance where we can be involved, but maybe not. And the agency compliance verification activities as a consequence of the risk class determined. So when you make the risk class determination, so the assessment, and you come to a certain risk class for a compliance demonstration item, this is not yet the LOI, this is just a risk. And based on this risk, we should be more or less involved. And therefore we have these 4 risk classes. Risk class 1, as explained before by Michael, is the easiest one. That means we review the certification program, we accept it as it is, and we agree of no further involvement. That means still that the PCM has finally to sign the technical visa, but there are no further experts involved due to the low risk. With the risk class 2, there's a light review, but normally there shouldn't be any test participation or something like this. It might be exceptionally possible, but we haven't seen such examples during the advanced application. Risk class 3, there already everything is possible, not to a tremendous extent, but everything could be, we could be involved in everything. And risk class 4 is just the highest risk, and based on the highest risk, we should be heavily involved. You cannot put a percentage behind, because you can imagine if we have a TC application, we cannot be involved in 100% of the type certification. For a small project with a very high risk, this might be the case, that we are completely involved. And this for sure depends as well on the 4 criteria. Here we see one example, or maybe you don't see. But you find this in the certification memorandum that you find on the webpage. There we have attachments for all the EASA panels. So if your change is affecting avionics, software, flight, so for each of these panels you find an appendix, an attachment to the cert memo, and there are further details how to make such a risk assessment and what this would mean for the involvement. So here we see, or don't see, the involvement for risk class 1, 2, 3, 4. And for avionics, and I will read it here, for example, for the risk class 2, typically it's the flight manual or flight manual supplement and the system functional hazardous analysis. So if it is affected for sure for such a change. In a risk class 3, we would go in more detail for the aircraft functional hazardous analysis, the aircraft system analysis, the preliminary or final system safety analysis. So there we are going more into detail. But please have a look on our webpage on the cert memo, and if you have questions, please come back to us on that. So next step is the LOI and projects applied for by DOA holders. I just hear we shall make a short break.
So before we do the break, we have a few more questions. One of the question was, how does the performance of the organization is linked with the CDIs if the CDI is not specific to a panel or technical domain? I'm not quite sure that I understand completely, because the CDI is for a technical subject, so it is linked to a technical domain, so a panel. So I'm not quite sure that is completely understood.
Maybe the question is meant if several panels are affected by a CDI, which might happen. And in such a case, there are 2 possibilities: that the applicant provides a proposal which is already specific per this technical domains, or it's your choice. The more specific you are, the better the predictability is for you, but it's not an obligation. If you provide the risk assessment just based on this overall CDI, where several panels are affected, then it's on our experts to decide. Let's say you have one panel, there's something critical, the second panel there's something novel, and the third panel there's something complex. Finally, you come up with a risk class 4, high involvement, which is not the full truth. But then it is on us, on the expert side, okay, for me it's just critical, but nothing else, and that's why my involvement is such and such. Again, this is just a tool, it's just providing an idea of high risk, okay, higher involvement, and then the actual level of involvement that shall be proposed is based on the activity or data. And there is the idea, okay, this document should be retained by EASA, this test should be witnessed by EASA, and all the rest makes no sense for me. This is the finally proposed LOI. And if a CDI is not covered, is covered by several panels, you can propose it already like this, or we will do it.
Okay, one other question was on how EASA is managing internally the necessary change of mindset and how industry can assist in this. I think Alain wanted to respond on that.
Well, it's an ongoing process, so we have a lot of tools. We are working together here. It started, in fact, with the various working groups internal to the agency, with industry, the CERT memo development. This CERT memo has been really the best way to focus attention and to show our team, our experts, that this is a new process for our common benefit. So it's a constant effort internally, and where we need industry help is in the pilot project phase, for instance. We need to have real open communication on what is working, not working, and we have to do this in a constructive manner. We may also have observation on how the DOA is preparing the CDIs. For sure, CDI is a strange animal. We still need to learn a lot about CDI. It has to be flexible, etc. And anything which is flexible, at the beginning, it's a bit uncomfortable to implement. But together, we can do it. And your feedback on how it works, how you see it. There are a number of questions on the perceived level of involvement, for instance, from our teams. We will work on it. But what is really good also to mention, since last year, we have further refined the Certification Directorate organization. We had before, you are familiar with what we name chief experts, senior experts. We have also today the same chief PCMs, good example here on the podium, Rolf, doing a good job at selling LOI internally, and chief PCM together with senior PCMs. And those groups of senior experts, senior PCM, chief expert, chief PCMs, have a key role to play here, together with you. They will be the one really developing the material, the CERT memo, for instance. I know I anticipate some other questions, so I can already reply. The CERT memo is heavy, is very long, and very detailed, for sure. But we are learning from experience, and we will streamline it later. But the CERT memo was part of the change management. Our chief expert, our senior experts, together with the complete community and you, DOA, developed the famous annexes. One could argue the annexes might be sometimes too prescriptive or so. We will work on it. That's a commitment. But it is part of the change management. And I would say, reply to Andreas, in fact, today you are already doing a lot to support us into this change of mindset. Because the pilot projects are really good. I don't want to open it now because we have a dedicated presentation later on. The pilot project, the negotiation, if I may say, in the steering group, for instance, LOI steering group, where ASD and other industry stakeholders are represented, we learned a lot from each other. And also we have, in the various industry working groups, we have a number of messages for you. How to approach the agency from a new DOA perspective. How to ensure that your expert and our experts are working together in this new mindset. We have our experts, we have our challenges. I'm pretty sure you, in your DOAs, sometimes also have your own challenges with your own experts. So together, we have to make sure we go to the next step. So, in a nutshell, the reply is we continue this really detailed communication, which is really appreciated today in the various working groups, steering groups, and we learn from the pilot project, and together we introduce this new mindset to show our respective teams that we work on what is really of higher interest and higher added value. That's our common challenge, both at technical and management level.
Maybe to add here as well, beside the training that we performed already, as well, the new risk-based approach provides necessarily a certain standardization. So we have to document why are we involved based on this risk, and so we have a certain standardization and maybe change your mindset as well.
Okay, thanks very much. We are slightly delayed, but I think quite good so far. I would break now for the coffee break, 20 minutes. Could you please be back 1:45 for the next session? Thank you.